Jean Tierney often found herself labeled as a sick rose, and that description truly captures her essence. She garnered immense admiration for her breathtaking beauty, yet this praise came with a hidden price. Beneath her flawless exterior lay a woman grappling with profound pain. Few have radiated glamour quite like Jean did in films like Laura and Heaven Can Wait. But she faced cruel, inhumane treatments and struggled with alcoholism. Despite these hardships, her performances shone brightly, earning her Oscar nominations. It wasn't just the moviegoers who were enchanted by her. She had already captivated the most powerful man in the world. This is the captivating yet tragic story of Jean Tierney. Born Jean Eliza Tierney in Brooklyn, New York, on November 19, 1920, she was the daughter of Howard, a successful insurance broker, and Belle, a socialite from the esteemed Taylor family. As the middle child, she had an older brother, Butch, and a younger sister, Pat. Jean attended the prestigious St. Margaret's School in Waterbury, Connecticut, where she thrived academically and showcased her poetic talent, even having one of her poems, Night, published in the school newspaper. In 1929, Jean traveled across Europe with her family, continuing her education under a governess to ensure a smooth back to school. After returning to the States, she enrolled at the Annenberg School in Fairfield, where her passion for acting blossomed. At just 15, she took on the lead role of Jo in the school's production of Little Women. Her family later sent her to Lausanne, Switzerland, to attend Brillantamont International School for 2 years. There, she learned French and mingled with Hollywood's elite. On a ship back to school, she met silent film star Douglas Fairbanks, and they quickly formed a friendship. In 1938, after returning to America, Jean enrolled at Miss Porter School in Connecticut. The school's curriculum was designed to prepare girls for social debuts and successful marriages, emphasizing charm and beauty over motherhood responsibilities, as they would have staff to manage domestic duties. A few years later, Jacqueline Bouvier would also graduate from this institution. Meanwhile, a charming young man, known to his friends as Jack, was traveling through Europe. After spending a summer helping his former bootlegger father, now an American ambassador in London, he explored the Soviet Union, the Balkans, and the Middle East before returning to the U.S. to attend Harvard. Jack would play a significant role in the emotional lives of both Jean Tierney and Jacqueline Bouvier. At this stage in her life, Jean began to wonder if there was more to her existence than the expected role of a charming society wife. During a trip to California after graduation, she crossed paths with Anatole Litvak, a well-known Hollywood director. He was captivated by her beauty and suggested that she should pursue a career in film. This led to an opportunity for a screen test with Warner Brothers, which she eagerly accepted. To her delight, the studio expressed interest in signing her. However, her excitement quickly faded when her parents insisted she return home instead of following her dream of acting. Reluctantly, Jean compiled and made her debut at the Fairfield County Club on September 24, 1938. She later voiced her disdain for such debutante events, criticizing them as a way for fathers to justify their absence from their children's lives. After completing her debut season, Jean approached her parents about acting once more. This time they agreed, but only if she pursued a career in legitimate theater. She then honed her craft in Greenwich Village, New York, studying under esteemed directors Benno Schneider and George Abbott. Her father, eager to support her aspirations, established the Bell Tier Company, named after her mother. Jean made her Broadway debut in 1938 with a minor role in the comedy What a Life, where she made an impression simply by carrying a bucket of water across the stage. A critic remarked on her performance, highlighting her beauty even in such a small role. Jean continued to chase her acting dreams, serving as an understudy in The Primrose Path. By early 1939, she landed a credited role as Molly O'Day in Miss O'Brien Entertains. Her growing talent caught the attention of Warner Brothers again, but she turned down their offer, opting instead for a 6-month contract with Columbia that paid her $350 a week. Interestingly, while cosmetic enhancements became the norm in Hollywood, her contract specifically forbade any alterations to her appearance, including braces for her slightly protruding teeth, which Columbia believed contributed to her natural allure. Before making her film debut, Jean returned to the stage, portraying Peggy Carr in the 1939 production of Ring 2. A confident critic predicted a bright future for her in theater, speculating that the film industry might soon lure her away. And indeed, as her profile rose, Jean became a media darling, gracing the pages of Harper's Bazaar and Vogue. Shortly after arriving in Hollywood in 1939, her agent Leland Hayward introduced her to the legendary producer Howard Hughes. Hughes, one of the wealthiest men in the world, was known for his reclusive nature and kept his personal life private, despite his numerous romantic entanglements with actresses. He was instantly smitten with Jean, but she remained skeptical of his intentions, later reflecting that he likely couldn't love anything that didn't have a motor. Nevertheless, Hughes was determined to win her over. In 1939, he invited Jean and her mother to lunch, but took them on an unexpected adventure to an airfield, where he flew them to Tijuana, Mexico, for a lavish meal and dancing at a private restaurant. Once Jean agreed to date Hughes, he showered her with gardenias, transforming a room into a fragrant paradise before their dinner date. He even secured an executive position for her brother at Hughes Aircraft. During the summer of 1940, when Jean faced an intestinal issue, Hughes sent his personal doctor to look after her. Despite his many shortcomings, Hughes could display genuine care and generosity, especially when he felt a real connection with someone. However, his usual extravagant gifts and displays of wealth failed to impress Jean, who had grown up in affluence. She pointed out that luxury items like cars, furs, and jewels weren't her weaknesses. In the end, their relationship remained platonic, even though Hughes harbored unrequited romantic feelings for her. On the other hand, Jean's career at Columbia started off slowly. Directors often cast her based on her looks rather than her acting talent, relegating her to decorative roles. Though her contract forbade any changes to her appearance, a cameraman suggested she slim down to improve her on-screen presence. While flipping through Harper's Bazaar, she stumbled upon an ad for a miracle diet and decided to give it a shot. She adhered to this diet for the next 2 decades, claiming she eliminated starches and survived on salads, lean meats, and small portions. Essentially, she followed a keto diet long before it became trendy, though she candidly admitted her love for food. Feeling frustrated with Columbia's lack of suitable roles, Jean left Hollywood for Broadway in 1940, landing a starring role in The Male Animal. The play was a hit, and her performance received rave reviews. One critic remarked on her vibrant energy, calling it her best work yet. Jean's Hollywood career might have stalled if not for Darryl Zanuck, who spotted her during a performance of The Male Animal. He instructed his assistant to remember her name. That same night at the Stork Club, he saw her again, dancing with Robert Morley and indulging in caviar, her newfound favorite. Mistaking her for another woman, he told his assistant to forget the actress from the play and focus on the one he saw that night. Zanuck later called her the most beautiful woman in movie history. Jean's first role at Fox came as Eleanor Stone in The Return of Frank James, but both the film and her performance flopped. She was her own harshest critic, leaving the premiere horrified by the sound of her voice on screen, which she likened to Minnie Mouse. A woman of strong appetites and addictive tendencies, she continued to smoke heavily for the rest of her life. Her initial role didn't open many doors for acting opportunities, so Jean began socializing in Hollywood, often seen with leading men like Desi Arnaz, Eddie Albert, and Robert Sterling. A significant change occurred during the 1940 holiday season when she met Franco-Russian fashion designer Oleg Cassini at a party hosted by Constance Muir. Their connection was immediate, and she soon stirred up Hollywood gossip by spending New Year's Eve weekend with him. They eloped to Las Vegas on June 1, 1941, tying the knot in a private ceremony. Jean felt anxious about how her family would react to her decision to marry a foreigner. As she feared, her parents were horrified and nearly disowned her. The situation worsened when her father left her mother for another woman, leaving Jean heartbroken. He stopped paying her salary from the family business and took the $50,000 she had saved to settle his own debts. Although she sought legal recourse, the family divide remained unhealed, and they stayed estranged for the rest of his life. Jean remembered how her mother would go weeks without speaking to her and refused to visit as long as she was married to Oleg. Oleg eventually crossed paths with Jacqueline Bouvier, the designer behind the iconic Jackie look that defined her public image as First Lady and beyond. For the first time, Jean found herself cut off from Connecticut's elite social circles. While this newfound freedom might have felt exhilarating, it also brought significant stress into her life. The abrupt severance from her parents led to a mysterious illness that her doctors attributed to stress and allergies. Without her parents' financial backing, Jean depended solely on her earnings and those of Cassini. In 1941, she landed a minor role alongside Paul Mooney in Hudson's Bay, followed by a more substantial part in Tobacco Road. Unfortunately, critics were not impressed with her performances. Eventually, she secured a lead role as a Confederate spy in Belle Starr, yet the critical reception remained unfavorable. Jean, ever self-aware, later admitted that the part of a female outlaw wasn't exactly suited for someone fresh out of finishing school. Looking back, it's clear that her reviews, particularly from the New York Times, were heavily biased. While her early performances weren't stellar, they often surpassed those of other actresses from her era, who received far more leniency. These harsh critiques weighed heavily on Jean, who was already grappling with the emotional turmoil of her life. Jean's next role was as Zia in Sundown, but once again, her performance failed to impress critics. One review noted that she continued to leave a distinct impression, albeit not a favorable one. Joe Skank once told her that he believed she had a future in acting, as she was the only girl who could endure so many poor films. However, by December 1941, when the U.S. entered the war, one silver lining in Jean's career was that it provided a comfortable life for her and Cassini in Hollywood. The reviews for her portrayal of Poppy Smith in The Shanghai Gesture were slightly kinder, but the critics were still sharp. One review pointed out that when Jean, looking stunning, entered Madame Jin Singh's vast casino, she sniffed the air like a cat exploring a new territory. Unfortunately, her performance was likened to a minor role in a school play. Despite facing numerous challenges, Jean pressed on with her career, taking on the role of Eve in Son of Fury, the story of Benjamin Blake in 1942. While some critics offered backhanded compliments, suggesting that her acting skills left much to be desired, they noted that her limited dialogue allowed her to shine in her Hawaiian print swimsuits. Following this, she starred as Susan Miller in the screwball comedy Rings on Her Fingers, directed by Reuben Mullen, where the reviews were equally harsh. However, her next role in China Girl garnered more positive feedback, with one critic appreciating her portrayal of a well-educated Chinese girl, emphasizing that her stillness was effective. By November 1942, Jean and her husband, Cassini, had saved enough to purchase a small house and were considering starting a family. Yet their plans took an unexpected turn when Cassini was drafted into the Coast Guard and later moved to Fort Riley, Kansas. Although he was stationed domestically, allowing Jean to visit often, their marriage faced turbulent moments. Cassini's jealousy and quick temper led to a dramatic incident where he knocked a photographer to the ground for inappropriately grabbing Jean, perhaps serving as a lesson for that photographer. While continuing her acting career in Hollywood, Jean's big break came when she landed the lead role in the comedy Heaven Can Wait, directed by the renowned Ernst Lubitsch. This experience proved to be a significant learning opportunity for her. She later reflected on Lubitsch's demanding nature, recalling how he pushed her limits during a lengthy scene that took 5 hours to perfect. After a particularly grueling day, she confronted him, expressing her frustration about his constant shouting. Lubitsch retorted that it was his job to shout, to which she humorously replied that while she was paid to endure it, it wasn't enough. This exchange lightened the tension and improved their working relationship. Despite his challenging approach, Lubitsch's expertise contributed to Heaven Can Wait becoming a box office success, earning over $1 million. Ironically, one of Jean's lines in the film reflected her mixed feelings about Kansas, stating her love for the state, but her reluctance to live there. When the film premiered in August 1943, Jean was living in Kansas with Cassini at the Army base. Just as her career seemed to be on the rise, she faced a personal setback. In March 1943, after learning she was pregnant, she took a hiatus from acting to volunteer at the Hollywood Canteen, both as a patriotic gesture and a publicity move. Unfortunately, in June, she contracted rubella, a condition whose potential effects on her unborn child were not well understood at the time. Despite this, she continued her war efforts until relocating with Cassini to Washington, D.C. On October 14, 1943, she gave birth prematurely to their daughter Daria. The moment Daria arrived, it became clear that she faced serious health challenges. She had fluid issues in her middle ear, was blind in one eye, and exhibited significant developmental delays, which plunged Jean into anxiety. As she paced the hospital corridors, she and Cassini discussed their options and decided to bring their daughter home, determined to provide her with the best care, including professional support. Back in Hollywood, Jean sought to maintain a sense of normalcy, often sharing her pride in Daria with the media. A year later, the Fan, unable to contain her excitement, revealed that she had escaped quarantine for German measles 2 years earlier just to meet Jean, declaring that she had to be there because Jean was her favorite. This shocking confession filled Jean with anger and despair. She couldn't believe that such reckless behavior and unfortunate circumstances could lead to such tragic consequences. Jean later shared this story with the media, which inspired Agatha Christie to weave it into her Miss Marple mystery, The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. This title alludes to a line from The Lady of Shalott, where the lady cries out about a curse that has befallen her, mirroring Jean's growing sense of despair. Yet things were about to get even worse. Once Daria was comfortably settled at home with a nurse, Jean returned to the screen, taking on her most renowned role in the film Noir Laura. The production faced its share of hurdles, particularly with the original director, Ruben Mamoulian, who struggled to effectively guide Jean and her co-star, Dana Andrews. After reviewing the initial footage, the studio replaced Mamoulian with Otto Preminger. Under Preminger's direction, Jean blossomed into a world-class actress, finally able to showcase her full range of talent. Vincent Price praised her performance in Laura, stating that no one else could have portrayed Laura quite like Jean Tierney, citing her unique blend of beauty, elegance, and intrigue. However, the New York Times took a different stance, criticizing her portrayal as disappointing. They acknowledged her beauty but felt she lacked the sophistication needed for the role of an advertising executive, instead appearing too youthful and naive. It seemed that the Times had developed a habit of targeting Jean at every turn. Despite the mixed reviews, Laura became a commercial hit, grossing $1 million at the box office. While conflict raged in Europe, Jean faced her own battle at home, securing her daughter's future. Initially, it was unclear how severely rubella had affected her daughter's brain, as the child seemed to be developing normally. However, as time passed, the extent of the damage became evident. She struggled to reach basic developmental milestones, like sitting up or speaking, and while her body grew, her mind remained trapped in a state of perpetual infancy. When World War II ended in 1945, Oleg Cassini returned to a life that felt anything but ordinary. Proud of his Russian royal lineage, he found himself unprepared for the challenges of raising a child with special needs. In 1946, he left Jean and their daughter, leaving Jean heartbroken and her hopes for her daughter's progress shattered. To cope, she threw herself into her acting career, taking on the role of Tina Tomasino in A Bell for Adano. Although the film didn't meet expectations, it garnered some positive feedback from critics. Jean Tierney solidified her legacy with her unforgettable portrayal of Ellen Barrett Harland in Leave Her to Heaven. She described her character as deeply troubled, noting that it was a captivating role, one that an actress like Bette Davis would have eagerly embraced, embodying a truly malicious woman. Although she didn't consider herself spiteful by nature, she admitted that it's hard for any actress to resist such enticing parts. This standout performance not only earned her a well-deserved Oscar nomination, but also garnered widespread acclaim. Years later, in 2007, Martin Scorsese expressed his admiration for Leave Her to Heaven, highlighting Jean as one of the most underrated actresses of Hollywood's golden age. The film's stunning Technicolor presentation showcased Jean's most striking feature, her captivating eyes. After finishing the shoot, co-star Vincent Price once again praised Jean. He humorously remarked that her enchanting eyes drove him crazy every time they acted together. Although they had previously worked together in Dragonwyck, that film didn't receive the same warm reception. However, it held personal significance for Jean, as it was during this project that she met the charming Harvard graduate and war hero John Fitzgerald Kennedy. In the wake of Cassini's betrayal and the struggles with her daughter, Jean found solace in Kennedy's company. They bonded over their respective challenges. Kennedy had a sister, Rosemary, who faced severe mental disabilities due to complications at birth. While Jean fought to prevent her daughter Daria from being institutionalized, Rosemary's fate was different. The Kennedy family kept the truth about Rosemary's condition tightly under wraps, sending her to various institutions instead. It's been noted that when John was around, Rosemary seemed as bright and joyful as any girl her age. He took her to a tea dance and even helped her debut at Buckingham Palace in 1938 while he assisted his father in his ambassadorial duties. The pressure of making a debut in front of the British royal family would be daunting for anyone, yet Rosemary practiced tirelessly for the occasion. Unfortunately, during the event, she stumbled, and although the family pretended nothing had happened, they were reportedly mortified. At that time, there were whispers that Rosemary aspired to work in social welfare or as a kindergarten teacher, and she even dreamed of becoming an actress. Like many young people, she experienced emotional highs and lows and was curious about relationships. The thought of her becoming pregnant outside of marriage or losing her composure in public was more than their father, Joseph Kennedy, could bear. In 1941, Joseph and Rose made the tragic decision to have her lobotomized, aiming to shield their family's reputation, a reputation that had already weathered Joseph's past as a bootlegger during Prohibition. The procedure was horrifying and barbaric, performed with only a mild tranquilizer to ease Rosemary's anxiety. Marketed as a cure for her depression, the reality was far from it. Drilling into her skull and scraping her brain with crude instruments was hardly a refined approach to mental health. The aftermath was devastating. Rosemary's mental faculties were nearly obliterated, reducing her to the cognitive level of a toddler. She lost her ability to walk or speak, becoming largely unresponsive. Soon after, she was placed in a private psychiatric hospital, where she would remain for the rest of her life. Joseph Kennedy embarked on a significant propaganda push to ensure that his daughter was labeled as having mental retardation rather than mental illness. This distinction was crucial for the family's reputation, especially as John Kennedy harbored serious presidential ambitions. The Kennedy family kept their secrets tightly under wraps, and it's often suggested that John felt deeply impacted by the way his parents treated his sister. This was precisely the outcome Jean Tierney had worked to shield her daughter from, at least for the time being. Thankfully, she and Jack Kennedy found solace in each other, discussing their shared pain and managing to uplift one another. Jean later reflected on their conversations, recalling how delightful they were. She remembered their good times together, noting that Jack was always caring and protective. Even after he became a senator and then president, he made a point to visit her when he learned she was unwell. When they first met, Jack was a serious young man with aspirations, not the womanizer some might think. However, a romantic relationship between them was never meant to be. When Jean sought a divorce from Cassini, Jack had a candid conversation with her. During a lunch in New York, he unexpectedly told her that he could never marry her. In that moment, she sat quietly and barely above a whisper, said goodbye to him. Throughout her connection with Kennedy, Jean continued to pursue her film career, landing the lead role in The Razor's Edge. A close friend and mother figure had written the part of Isabel Bradley Matten specifically for her, though much of the screenplay underwent significant changes before filming. While the movie didn't achieve blockbuster status, it did allow her to bond with her co-star, Tyrone Power. Despite Power's feelings for her, Jean, still entangled with Kennedy, insisted they remain just friends, a choice that preserved their friendship for years to come. The following year, she starred in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, portraying a widow haunted by a ghostly sea captain. One critic remarked on her performance, suggesting that her usual style lacked emotional depth despite her beauty. Following her separation from Kennedy, Jean faced a downward spiral in her life. Heartbroken once again, she decided to sell her Hollywood home and return to her mother's place in Connecticut. Under family pressure, she made the heart-wrenching choice to enroll her struggling daughter Daria in a school for children with disabilities. During this tumultuous period, Howard Hughes stepped in, covering Jean's medical expenses and arranging specialized care for Daria. Jean described her emotional state, likening the emptiness she felt to a vast cave. In early 1948, as she finalized her divorce, she and Cassini rekindled their physical relationship. Shortly after their divorce was finalized in March, they discovered that Jean was pregnant again. Overjoyed by the news, they welcomed another daughter, Christina, on November 19, 1948, and eventually reconciled and remarried. Jean made her return to film in Whirlpool in 1949, but the reviews were mixed. The New York Times' Bosley Crowther harshly criticized her performance, suggesting viewers might need to be in a trance to enjoy it. This title aptly reflected Jean's chaotic life during that period. After Daria's institutionalization, her depression deepened. With limited options for treating bipolar disorder and the stigma surrounding it, she leaned heavily on her friends in the film industry for support. Darryl F. Zanuck cast her as Mary Bristol in Night in the City, and after filming, he expressed concern for her well-being, suspecting she was struggling and believing that work might provide some relief. Jean found comfort in acting, revealing that she felt at ease only when portraying someone else. During her time in London for a film, she enjoyed dinner with Clifton Webb, who introduced her to Marina Dietrich, a connection she had previously made through Dietrich's daughter. Once back in the U.S., Jean's career gained momentum, and in 1951, she took on the role of Lily Duran in On the Riviera. Even the New York Times acknowledged that her performance outshone the film itself. Shortly after, Fox lent her and Ray Milland to Warner Brothers for Close to My Heart, where they played a couple grappling with infertility and considering adoption. This role struck a painful chord for Jean, especially given her heartache over her daughter Daria, and may have played a part in her eventual nervous breakdown. To cope with her grief, she kept herself busy, traveling to Argentina in 1951 to film Way of a Gaucho. While there, she leveraged her celebrity status to spend Christmas with Prince Ali Khan, who was navigating a difficult divorce from Rita Hayworth. However, upon returning home, Jean faced her own challenges. Cassini, growing increasingly distant, spent less time with the family, prompting her to file for divorce again a few years after their remarriage. In their divorce settlement, Cassini promised to leave half of his estate to their daughters, a promise he later broke. Although Jean passed away before him and never learned of his betrayal, they remained friends throughout her life. After her divorce, she took on the role of Dorothy Bradford in Plymouth Adventure, where she was humorously described as a firm pillar of well-starched ladyhood. During filming, she had a brief but intense romance with co-star Spencer Tracy, who later remarked on her beauty, noting that while the films didn't fully capture her essence, he had managed to do so, albeit late in his life. The character she played, a woman who takes her own life, might have resonated deeply with Jean during a turbulent time, perhaps serving as a cathartic outlet for her emotions. Nevertheless, the film only performed modestly at the box office. Despite her busy acting career, Jean maintained a vibrant social life. In April 1952, film producer Dorothy invited her to an MGM luncheon, where she met Queen Juliana and Prince Bernard of the Netherlands. By then, Jean had become a well-known figure at royal events, showcasing her comfort among the elite. Unlike many of her Hollywood peers, who often felt out of place in such circles, Jean's poise made her a desirable guest. In 1953, she reconnected with Prince Ali Khan in Paris, and they began dating. She owned a home in London, where she frequently hosted gatherings, and Khan soon became a regular visitor. Eventually, she rented a place near his on the French Riviera. Jean described her role in Khan's social life, noting that she acted as his hostess at receptions, marking the dawn of the jet-set era. Initially, it was easy to be captivated by this glamorous role, mingling with his influential and royal friends. In May 1953, during Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, Khan booked an extravagant suite along the parade route, costing nearly $10,000 a night, providing them with a breathtaking view of the celebrations. Shortly after the coronation, Khan proposed to Jean and then flew to consult with his father, Aga Khan III, the leader of the Ismaili Muslims. However, Aga Khan disapproved of the union and insisted that his son abandon his divorce proceedings, declaring that he would not accept Jean as a daughter-in-law. Khan wasn't easily discouraged, so he made his way to London, where they were shooting Personal Affair. The film turned out to be a hit, garnering positive reviews both in the UK and the US. Bosley Crowther eventually acknowledged Jean Tierney's performance, noting how she approached her role as the schoolmaster's wife with a serious and nuanced touch. Jean also starred opposite Clark Gable in Never Let Me Go, and while audiences loved their on-screen chemistry, she candidly admitted she didn't have any romantic feelings for him. By 1954, Khan had finalized his divorce, paving the way for a potential marriage with Jean. But just when things seemed to be aligning, another hurdle appeared. After discovering Jean's public relationship with Khan, Cassini sought custody of their younger daughter, Tina, through the courts. Realizing that a lasting relationship with Khan was unlikely, Jean opted to return to America and settle in Connecticut. Meanwhile, Khan took on the role of his father's ambassador to Pakistan and moved to Karachi. Despite his new responsibilities, he often found time to visit Hollywood, stopping by to see Jean on set whenever he could. However, fate seemed to conspire against them, preventing their love from fully blooming. Jean was holding on, but she was nearing her breaking point. Despite her attempts to maintain a facade of normalcy, her life was falling apart. During the filming of The Left Hand of God with Humphrey Bogart in 1955, he noticed her stress and brought it to the attention of Fox executives, suggesting she needed help. Unfortunately, they brushed off his concerns, insisting that Jean is a trooper, a common dismissal of actors' struggles at the time. Jean once noted that unusual behavior often goes unnoticed on movie sets, and remarked that it was typical to assume all actors had some neuroses. While she remained professional and delivered stellar performances on camera, her internal turmoil became overwhelming once the cameras stopped rolling. As rumors about her declining mental health circulated, friends who tried to visit were often turned away because she sometimes didn't recognize them. Those who did manage to see her found that she had no recollection of their past conversations. In the days that followed, she grew increasingly paranoid, isolating herself and believing she was the subject of public gossip. She later reflected that her exit from Hollywood was portrayed as a dramatic walkout, but no one understood the depths of her struggles, emphasizing that while Hollywood can be harsh on women, it wasn't the root of her issues. In hopes of improving her situation, Khan planned a getaway for the two of them. When he asked Fox for a break for Jean, the studio denied the request and instead suspended her, a common practice back then. If they had returned rejuvenated and ready to work, the studio likely would have resumed her contract without much hassle. However, when she came back to Hollywood, she was still unwell and unable to perform. Eventually, her family learned about her condition, prompting her brother to fly out to Hollywood. Recognizing her need for professional help, he took her back to New York City and admitted her to an upscale sanitarium. Sadly, this decision only worsened her situation. She later expressed deep regret about her time there, describing her experience with electric shock therapy as one of the most humiliating moments of her life, likening herself to a lab rat. In the mid-20th century, electric shock therapy was seen as a primary treatment for mental illness, and it even made a comeback in the 21st century. Back in the 1950s, though, the approach was quite primitive and often brutal. Jean found herself strapped into a chair with a padded stick between her teeth while electricity surged through her body. This horrific experience led to involuntary urination and blackouts, leaving her with no memory of what happened. During these agonizing sessions, she desperately pleaded with the doctors for release, but the torment continued unabated. Jean also endured other contemporary treatments aimed at stabilizing her mood. Doctors believed that high body temperatures could trigger mania, so they sometimes wrapped her in frozen sheets for long periods. While some of these methods brought temporary relief, they were often short-lived and expensive, leading to a cycle of repeated interventions. Frustrated by the lack of lasting improvement, her family decided to transfer her to the Institute for Living in Hartford, Connecticut. There, she experienced a similar routine of breakdowns, treatments, brief recoveries, and relapses. Living with her mother in a 14th-floor New York apartment, Jean hit rock bottom in the spring of 1957 when she considered ending her life. In her autobiography, she described how she found herself on the window ledge, feeling surprisingly calm as she contemplated the jump. The thought of how she might look after the fall stopped her. She didn't want to end up as a scrambled egg. When the police arrived, she awkwardly claimed she was just cleaning the windows, a story met with skepticism by her family, who insisted she seek treatment again. This time, her brother did some research and discovered the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, known for its exceptional psychiatric care. At Menninger, Jean found a supportive environment where she could express her feelings and learn coping strategies. She later reflected on her journey, noting that her doctors reassured her that her career had no bearing on her illness. A crucial lesson for her was learning to accept defeat and recognize that not every situation could be resolved. Feeling more empowered, Jean chose not to return to Hollywood, but instead took a job at Tal's Ladies Apparel in Westboro, Kansas. This position allowed her to live independently while continuing her therapy. Unfortunately, her newfound privacy was short-lived when the press caught wind of her location and began to intrude. Upset by the invasion of her personal life, Jean decided to speak openly about her struggles, a decision that not only aided her recovery, but also helped raise awareness about mental health issues. By the fall of 1958, Jean felt a renewed sense of vitality as she vacationed in Aspen, Colorado, alongside her mother and Tina. She shared with the media that doctors often say healing from a broken arm or leg takes months, and it can take years for it to feel normal again. So, she pondered, what does that mean for a mind that's fractured? While she knew challenges loomed ahead, she resolved to face them, buoyed by the support of those around her. Surprisingly, she even mentioned that the voices she heard were, in fact, sweet. During her time in Aspen, she crossed paths with Texas W. Howard Lee, a wealthy Texas oil man who was navigating a pricey divorce from actress Hedy Lamarr. Although Lee was hesitant to engage with another actress initially, he quickly found himself captivated by Jean's charm and beauty. However, his affection couldn't shield her from the ongoing struggles she faced, especially during the hectic holiday season. Acknowledging her need for support, she made the decision to check herself into Menninger on Christmas Day 1958. For almost a year, Lee made the effort to visit her every other weekend, flying in from Houston. After her release in November 1959, Jean returned to her mother's home, hoping to reintegrate into society. She attempted to revive her acting career, landing a role in Holiday for Lovers, but the stress became overwhelming, prompting her to withdraw and check back into Menninger. In 1960, She took on a less demanding role in an episode of the General Electric Theater, hosted by Ronald Reagan. On July 11, 1960, Jean married Lee in a simple ceremony in Aspen. Many were surprised that Lee chose to marry someone facing mental health challenges, but Jean understood his caring nature. She reflected that her happiest times were during her childhood, and while she was back in acting, she recognized that her life would always carry some degree of instability. Determined to understand her condition, she committed herself to learning as much as she could. Jean admitted that discussing mental illness, especially her own, felt akin to examining a bug under glass. Throughout her life, she faced episodes of delusion, sometimes convinced she was pregnant and overeating as a result, or wandering her Houston neighborhood in search of her daughter, Daria. Yet these episodes would eventually fade, allowing her to regain her clarity. She described the moments of recovery as if a curtain had been lifted, often asking Howard, "Have I been sick?" to which he would respond with a chuckle, "Oh boy, have you ever." Through her journey, Jean gained a profound understanding of her illness and herself, never placing blame on anyone else for her struggles. She recognized that her condition was manageable, unlike more severe illnesses, and took responsibility for her healing. Above all, she expressed gratitude for having her mind back, emphasizing that the mind is the most beautiful part of the body. Jean's comeback to the film industry was anything but easy. In 1962, she accepted the lead role in Return to Peyton Place, but unfortunately, she had to step back due to her pregnancy, which tragically ended in a miscarriage around the 20-week mark. After that, she immersed herself in Advise and Consent, marking her fourth and final collaboration with director Otto Preminger. While many critics praised Jean's performance, Bosley Crowther remained uncharacteristically harsh, leading one film historian to note that Jean had returned to the screen after a 7-year hiatus for psychiatric treatment. It seems likely that she was also trying to recover from the relentless criticism she faced from Crowther throughout her career. He never had a kind word for her. Can you imagine rolling your eyes at every review in the New York Times? Crowther seemed to have a personal vendetta against her, regardless of her efforts. It's almost as if she had snubbed him at a party, because his critiques were scathing and oddly personal. Although Advise and Consent didn't reignite her film career, it did lead to a memorable reunion with John F. Kennedy. After the film's release in June 1962, President Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy invited Jean and her husband to a lunch at the White House. Sitting next to Kennedy allowed her to reminisce about old times. Being around his famously charming presence was a much-needed boost for Jean. However, just a year and a half later, she, like everyone else, watched in horror as her former love was assassinated on live television. Jean went on to complete Toys in the Attic in 1963 and starred in The Pleasure Seekers the following year before deciding to retire from acting. 5 years later, she made a brief return in the TV drama Daughter of the Mind, alongside Ray Milland. In the ensuing years, she split her time between Houston and a condo in Delray Beach, Florida, embracing her belief that wealth, beauty, and fame are fleeting. When those things fade, what remains is the desire to be useful, a sentiment she expressed by writing her autobiography. When Self-Portrait hit the shelves in 1979, mental illness was still a largely taboo topic. Jean's honest account of her struggles sparked conversations about mental health at a crucial time. Her final acting role came in 1980 with the TV miniseries Scruples. The release of her book and her performance in the series brought her back into the limelight, leading to several appearances on talk shows. She might have remained in the public eye had her husband's health not suddenly declined. After his passing in February 1981, she opted for a quieter life, retreating from the spotlight and spending her later years in Houston. Jean passed away on November 6, 1991, marking a bittersweet end to her Hollywood journey. Her long-standing smoking habit contributed to emphysema, which severely affected her health and ultimately led to her death at 70. With her striking aqua blue, cat-like eyes and perfectly symmetrical features, She had an almost doll-like beauty, accentuated by the iconic red lips of her era. Despite her stunning looks, she fought against being pigeonholed by her beauty, famously expressing that she wanted her talent to shine beyond just her appearance. Jean had a special connection to film noir, likely because her own life's shadows lent depth to her performances in this genre. The film Laura makes a lasting mark. It unfolds the tale of a detective captivated by a murdered woman, especially after he comes across her painting. This narrative resonates with the themes of many tantalizing, suspense-filled stories of passion and mortality that came later, including Hitchcock's Vertigo and various works by David Lynch. Laura occupies a distinct niche in our cultural memory, thanks to that iconic painting of Jean, her beauty frozen in time, an evasion of the harsh realities of aging and death. It serves as a poignant reminder of how a movie star's charm can be eternally enshrined on film. Although often overlooked and unjustly critiqued, Jean Tierney was pioneering in addressing mental health challenges and remains unforgettable for her mysterious and striking performances. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Jean Tierney's life, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. That wraps up this episode. We'll be back with a fresh video soon.